Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman. On the show tonight, the latest on the coronavirus from the Chicago Public Health Department. Plus, United Airlines slashes its domestic flights over fears of the virus. But how many and for how long? A look at the life of an innovative African-American taxidermist. And a sneak peek of WTTW's new special, Chicago by L, with Geoffrey Baer. But first tonight, a controversial case being heard at the nation's highest court. Here's Carol Marine. Carol.
Thank you, Brandis. The U.S. Supreme Court heard oral arguments today on a Louisiana law that would restrict doctors performing abortions to only those who have admitting privileges at nearby hospitals. The court struck down a similar Texas law in 2016, but since then, President Trump has appointed Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh to the court, and both had strong backing from anti-abortion groups. So what could this mean for the provision of abortion services, not just in Louisiana, but across the country? Joining us to share their perspectives, Peter Breen is Vice President and Senior Counsel at the Thomas More Society, a conservative public interest law firm. Breen was a Republican state lawmaker who also served as the GOP's floor leader. And Colleen Connell, she is the Executive Director of the American Civil Liberties Union of Illinois. Welcome back, both of you, to Chicago Tonight. So let's start with you, Colleen. Opponents of this Louisiana law are arguing what exactly?
That it is a repeat of the Texas law that you referenced that the Supreme Court struck down as an unconstitutional and undue burden on a woman's right to access reproductive health care, including abortion services. And the Louisiana law is virtually indistinguishable from the Texas law. And so it's really yet another effort by those who are opposed to women's rights to make reproductive health decisions to further erode the protections of Roe versus Wade and to erect barriers to women getting the health care they want and need.
Peter, supporters are arguing what?
Well, Louisiana came out strong today in the oral argument, talking about the fact that patients who've had abortions are being abandoned in emergency rooms, talking about the harms that this admitting privileges law would remedy. That's very different than what was argued 4 years ago with the Texas case, where pretty much that was swept aside. And the court said, well, there's nothing in the record about any sort of harms from lack of these admitting privileges. So today, again, Louisiana started with that perspective and made a very strong case. So and those were the questions asked by Chief Justice Roberts. They went right to that point. So that may be where this case comes down.
Colleen?
I strongly disagree. The trial court in the whole women's health case dealt with the lack of any real health advantage gained from those admitting privileges. And the consequence of those admitting privileges is that, in Texas, for example, the number of healthcare clinics, reproductive healthcare clinics went from 40 to 20. If the Louisiana law were allowed to go into effect, there would only be, I believe, one doctor in the state of Louisiana who could get and has gotten admitting privileges at hospitals. The reality is patients are not being abandoned in emergency rooms, at least not patients who are women who have abortions. Abortion is one of the safest procedures performed in the country today. It has fewer consequences and health risks than carrying a pregnancy to term, and it has fewer complications even than a shot of penicillin. And so the notion of patients being abandoned is just not true. And as to patients being able to be admitted to a hospital, if the patient is in an extreme situation, an emergency situation, both state and federal law require the admission of that patient to a healthcare facility. And so it's really an effort to restrict abortion and not to protect women.
Peter, are people who are proponents of this law arguing that they really want abortion to be healthier?
Well, and so here's the thing. There are certainly laws on the books, including in Louisiana and other places, that they would like to see abortion restricted. But this law goes to the point that, hey, if we're going to have this procedure, it needs to be done safely. And I would disagree with Colleen in a couple of points. Number one, it doesn't matter how small the number is. If that small number includes your wife, your daughter, your sister, they're not a statistic. They're someone who needs help. And we have a history, both in this state and in Louisiana, of bad practices at abortion clinics. You've got issues with sanitation, and you've got issues where I've talked to emergency room doctors myself who said these patients come in from botched abortions. no medical records, no transfer, and that's what this admitting privileges helps to do. Make sure there is a continuity of care. And in Louisiana as well, they had another part of that. The hospitals are the ones that actually certify that the doctors are competent to do the procedure, because in this Louisiana case, it was mentioned in oral argument today, they'd hired an ophthalmologist to do the abortions, they'd hired a radiologist to do the abortions. These procedures were not being done right in the state of Louisiana.
So the two of you are not going to agree on this on any basis. Do each of you agree that Justice Roberts ends up being the pivotal person who is going to be a decider on this, Colleen?
I think that's as good a surmise as any. Some of the people who watch the court carefully suggest that Kavanaugh could be someone whose vote is not all that clear, at least as predictable. So I think we really don't know, Carol. And from my quick review of the oral argument transcript and discussion, it's very hard to tell where the justices are leaning.
Hard
as you
to
well
read
know.
a Chief Justice's mind, isn't it?
It is, and the questioning is not necessarily indicative of how they're going to rule.
So Peter, is he pivotal in your view too?
Well, really, I mean, Justices Kavanaugh and Chief Justice Roberts are likely the two that people are looking at. And of course, Chief Justice Roberts has also made a point to those, particularly for those of us who are on the pro-life side, we'd like to see him move a little faster, but he likes to take a little more of a very slow-moving approach. The historic thing, though, about today is it is the first time in about 30 years where we've had 5 justices on the Supreme Court that appear they would be willing to take a good look again at Roe v. Wade. So that is really why there's so much attention.
Why not go knock down Roe v. Wade directly?
Well, and frankly, I wish they'd just rip the Band-Aid off, because all that does is puts the abortion law back to the states where it had been for nearly 200 years in our country's history. And so that's really what I wish they would do. But at the same time, the questions that were asked today were really to this particular law and talking about what evidentiary record was put in place at the court below.
Colleen, Justice Roberts is also concerned, or said to be concerned, about the court not being viewed as part of the left or part of the right in terms of how the public views whether it has partisan inclinations. Is it your sense that that is somehow at play here, or not really?
Again, it's very hard to tell, but I do think that the integrity of the court is at issue in this case, given the fact that Roe was decided 40 years ago. It reflects and has been built on, a whole set of case law and jurisprudence that protect ordinary people's rights to make basic decisions about such important issues as whether to have children, whether to use birth control, what kind of health care they want. And so for the court to actually undo Roe is really a much broader risk than just the Roe decision itself.
So Peter, precedent, as both of you as lawyers, precedent ends up weighing heavily in this conversation, whether you're conservative or liberal. Is the court inclined to overturn the precedent set by the Texas case?
Well, and what I would see, the questions I heard were, was this case different, or is this case different than Texas? That's really what they were looking at. But I think we do need to remember, the question here is not, is abortion going to be banned? That's not the question that was presented to the court. It's, are we going to have health and safety regulations like admitting privileges requirements? We in Illinois just wiped away our health and safety licensing requirements, which had been used to shut down abortion clinics in the past.
Pro-lifers are not worried about the health and safety of an abortion clinic, are they?
Well, no.
Or are they interested in slowing that down or eliminating it?
Well, so here's the thing. So here's part of the pro-life argument. Yeah, we would love to see every child welcomed, loving home, wanted. But if we're in this place where we have this medical procedure, well then for heaven's sakes, it needs to be as safe as possible, in part because the pro-life folks have been dealing with caring for women post-abortion. We do a lot of that work.
We have 20 seconds left. Last word, very fast.
I think women's health is at issue here when you impose regulations that don't advance women's health, but instead make it possible for them to access the health care they want and need. So this is not a health-related law. It's one to erect abortion burdens.
Colleen Connell, Peter Breen, thank you both for being with us on Chicago Tonight. Up next, why 2 Chicago police officers were taken off the street That and more ahead.
Don't miss one of our stories. Get them all delivered to your desktop or mobile device with a subscription to the WTTW News Daily Briefing. Go to WTTW.com/dailybriefing and sign up.
Here's more of what's making news in Chicago tonight. 2 police officers accused of shooting a Red Line passenger Friday afternoon have been relieved of their police powers. The Chicago Police Department says Interim Superintendent Charlie Beck made the decision after reviewing a recommendation made by the Civilian Office of Police Accountability, or COPA. COPA says it's reached no conclusions yet as it is still investigating, including reviewing material from CTA cameras and cell phone video, which surfaced on Twitter. After the shooting, the CPD asked the Cook County State's attorney to drop resisting arrest and drug charges against the man who was shot, Ariel Roman. His attorney says Roman was moved yesterday from intensive care to a regular hospital room. The Chicago Public Health Department reemphasizes that the coronavirus risk to the general public in Chicago remains low. Public Health Commissioner Allison Arwady today cautioned against jumping to conclusions about people who are being merely tested for the illness and promises that her department will inform the public when new cases are confirmed.
We've had more than 120 people in the state of Illinois, just like that person yesterday, who have been tested for coronavirus who tested negative. We're working to increase our testing, and the numbers of folks that are getting tested every day are going to continue to rise.
And ahead in the program, the editor of Crane Chicago Business on how the coronavirus is affecting Chicago businesses, including United Airlines. Whether or not Chicago Public Schools can rename Columbus Day as Indigenous Peoples Day is being challenged by members of the Italian American community in Chicago. Today, the Joint Civic Committee of Italian Americans, along with other ethnic groups, say they are challenging the move by the school board, claiming that it violates both state education board and CPS board rules by not first holding public hearings on the matter. The groups say they think both holidays should be observed, and they say they have the support of Mayor Lori Lightfoot.
She has gone above and beyond supporting not only the Italian American community, but every community that stands with us today in this coalition. She told us, she's called numerous people personally to say she did not know this was going to happen. She will not allow this to happen in the city of Chicago.
Meanwhile, a spokesperson for the Illinois State Board of Education says CPS's action does not violate state law. So what do you get the person who has everything for their birthday? Well, for Chicago's 183rd birthday, city government got her a new design. Mayor Lightfoot, along with several partners, unveiled the new look that Chicagoans will see mostly on city websites and city campaigns. The new design includes a single blue square and a red star borrowed from the city flag and the word Chicago in the city's new municipal font, appropriately called Big Shoulders. You can head to our website for more highlights from the year 1837. She looks good for 183 years old. As for the weather, mostly clear tonight with a low around 32. Then tomorrow, a slight chance of rain, otherwise mostly sunny and breezy with a high near 54. And now to some of today's top business headlines. Here's Crane Chicago business editor Ann Dwyer.
Brandis, United Airlines aims to trim flights, freeze hiring, and halt merit pay raises as it grapples with a swift drop in travel demand because of the coronavirus outbreak. The Chicago carrier's domestic schedule will be pared by 10% in April, and international flying will be chopped 20%. The CEO says similar reductions will probably be necessary for May. United has also imposed a hiring freeze through June and deferred merit-based salary increases for management until July 1st in an effort to prepare the company financially for a steep downturn in business. Meanwhile, McCormick Place has lost another major event due to concerns over coronavirus. The software giant Oracle will turn a 5,500-person meeting slated for later this month at the Chicago Convention Center into an online-only affair. This marks the second major event this week to nix plans at McCormick Place because of the outbreak. And finally, Nordstrom is closing all 6 of its Trunk Club stores, including the one in Chicago, and folding the fashion styling service into nearby department stores. The decision comes 5 years after Nordstrom paid $350 million to buy Trunk Club, with ambitions to grow the personal shopping business pioneered by the Chicago-based startup. For Crane's Chicago Business and chicagobusiness.com, I'm Ann Dwyer. Back to you, Brandis.
And thank you. The process of preserving animals using their own skin, feathers, or fur, also known as taxidermy, isn't usually classified as fine art. But an exhibit at the Field Museum is challenging that idea by shining a light on the artists behind many of the museum's own examples. Chicago Tonight producer Quinn Myers recently paid a visit. Here's another look.
The Hall of Birds at the Field Museum is jam-packed with hundreds of the world's most diverse, colorful, and exotic specimens, all carefully arranged in lifelike detail. But until recently, the person behind many of them was mostly unknown, even to Field Museum employees.
So Carl Cotton was a Field Museum taxidermist. He started here in 1947 and he worked here until 1971. We knew practically nothing about him other than we've seen some really cool pictures of him in the photo archives, and we were like, this is a black man who was hired at the Field Museum in 1947, not a very typical story.
Carl Cotton was the Field Museum's first African-American taxidermist and is now the focus of an exhibit honoring his legacy and craftsmanship. Exhibition developer Tori Lee curated the showcase, which besides his taxidermy work also details Cotton's upbringing on the south side of Chicago in the 1920s and 30s.
It was also this time of like huge cultural booming. It was this black cultural renaissance was happening here in Chicago. And so Carl grew up with people like Gwendolyn Brooks, with Charles White, with Tamil Black. He grew up with other artists, and he was kind of a non-traditional artist as a taxidermist.
That artistry is evident in the many dioramas and displays Cotton put together across the museum. He worked not only on birds, but also with reptiles and insects.
He was 100% an artist. He was a taxidermist, but for most people who do taxidermy, taxidermy is a form of art. He really used all the skills, his understanding and love of nature and his talent and skill as an artist to really create these displays.
A focal point of Cotton's work at the Field is the marsh birds of the Upper Nile River diorama, an intricate portrait of specimens like this shoebill stork and 21 other types of birds. Visitors to the exhibit will find archival footage that shows Cotton putting together the display, and not only the birds, but also the mud and plants, which are handmade with wax.
The time and effort it took to make every element is just something I think that people don't necessarily see or appreciate when they kind of walk through some of these halls. You see a diorama and you're like, cool, I've seen a million pictures that maybe look like this, but every single element of this was handcrafted by a person.
The Cotton retrospective is also something of a departure from how the Field usually puts together exhibits. This one involved tracking down Cotton's family members on social media, combing through museum archives, and interviewing old friends to help tell his story.
It was really a huge network and a huge labor of love. Like, so many people played a part in trying to piece this story together.
It also became a personal project for Lee, who says she sees parallels between Cotton's life and work and her own.
It's important to acknowledge that Black history has happened here at the Field Museum and has happened for a long time. I think even now museums, including the Field Museum, have issues with diversity, with equity, with representation, and it's really important to me to see both Black people in the museum and as the subject of exhibitions in a way that is produced by them.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Quinn Myers.
A natural talent, the taxidermy of Carl Cotton is on display at the Field Museum until early October. Up next, Geoffrey Baer with a preview of the much-anticipated Chicago by Elle, which premieres tonight.
Closed captioning for this program is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, pleased to give back to the community through numerous charitable initiatives.
Chicagoans may never quite agree about sports teams or local politics, but if there's one thing that unites the city, it's our elevated train lines, known of course as the L, literally. The transit system takes center stage in Geoffrey Baer's newest special, Chicago by L, which debuts in just a few minutes right here on WTTW. Here's a quick preview featuring an impromptu dance party at the 95th Street Red Line station.
Come on. There you go.
Music soothes the average beast.
What's going on? You ready to dance too?
No, I'm no dance.
I mean, when they gonna dance with us, they might laugh at us, but they better when they leave out the station.
Artist and community activist Theaster Gates dreamed it up as part of the CTA's public art program that enlivens L stations throughout the system. The CTA says more than 80 works of art made possible by government grants and private donors create a friendlier, more inviting atmosphere for riders and offer a glimpse into the rich history and unique character of the surrounding neighborhoods. Back at 95th Street, the art reflects the CTA's fundamental mission: to move people.
And here to tell us more about the show is its host, the one and only Geoffrey Baer, who has dance moves that all of us did not know about.
I didn't know about them.
Surprise! The L teaches you how to dance. So what's going on there?
So
that we
that's
just
the 95th
saw?
Street station, which is a brand new station at the very southern end of the Red Line. You know, as part of this whole CTA art program, the artist Theaster Gates had this idea to put a DJ booth in the station. And you know, for me, it's such a metaphor for this whole show that we're debuting in just a few minutes, Chicago by L. There's so much heart in this show. You know, you see people like coming up the escalator and all of a sudden they hear the music and then they're dancing in the L station, you know, and those women with the orange vests and the keys, you know, the employees getting everybody to dance as they go through the turnstiles. I mean, it's just, you know, it humanizes the system.
That's adorable. So why choose the L to do a show about Chicago's history and culture?
Oh, I think it's a really, you know, we always look for, you know, I've been doing these shows for 25 years, the river tour, the biking tour of Chicago.
Just a few.
Just a few. So we always look for kind of a route to follow that helps us kind of narrow down the subject. In this case, it sort of widens out the subject because the L goes to so many places, not every place, but so many places in Chicago. And the L, you know, these neighborhoods grew up around the L. The L is more than 100 years old. The L system, you know, was a catalyst in developing neighborhoods. And then, of course, we had massive neighborhood change in Chicago, mostly around the 1950s with the restrictive housing covenants ruled illegal. So you had white flight, you had disinvestment, you had massive, you know, racist housing policies, redlining. So now the L's still there. And so you can really go to places in Chicago and sort of see the evolution of neighborhoods of Chicago and the people in those neighborhoods who are working to make them better and are proud of them and committed to them.
What are some of the favorite spots of yours that are highlighted on the tour?
Well, you know, Eddie Griffin, the producer, and I rode every L line in the city from beginning to end with our yellow legal pads looking out the windows, you know, for things we didn't even know about. And a couple of things that really caught me that I'd never even seen before, down in Bronzeville, right at the 51st Street station, you have this, I look out the window and there's this shipping container mall right at the bottom of the steps. It's called Boxville. It's a place where they have entrepreneurs who are kind of incubating their businesses that, you know, without the expense of brick and mortar. Here's a t-shirt and printing business in a shipping container, helping to incubate the business. On the north side, we went to this Asian street market and tasted street food. It's called the Night Market. It's in Uptown. Some people call this New Chinatown. The street market is called Asia on Argyle. And you know, it's the whole neighborhood comes out and samples all this wonderful food. That guy right there next to me is his parents actually met on Argyle Street, and he's now kind of like the guy who's really the catalyst for really creating a lot of energy on Argyle Street in Uptown.
So the show, it's also really a history of the L itself, though, right?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, we ride the CTA's oldest L train, still operating, built in 1923. Take a look at this.
Since we're at the end of Chicago's first L line, we'll ride the CTA's oldest operating train, built in 1923. It's lovingly restored, maintained, and operated by volunteers.
Look at you guys. So that was really, I mean, I'm a kind of a train geek. So the essence of this show really is the neighborhoods. But if you're a train geek, there's lots of fun train stuff. Riding these vintage L trains was one of them. We had our own private L train for 10 days, taking us all around the city.
Wow.
Filming. We go to the repair shop where they overhaul CTA trains. They put them up on lifts. This is in Skokie, the Skokie shops. Look at this train going up on a lift there. And we also went to the control center. So this is this amazing high-tech control center with seems like thousands of screens all around you. You should know, if you are on a CTA train or on a platform, smile, because you're on television. They have 30,000 cameras watching the system. And these people in the control center are so passionate about keeping that system running and working properly.
And so there's also an interactive website that's launching with the special.
Absolutely. So it's WTTW.com/L, letter L, because in Chicago it's not EL, it's L. And the website just has so much extension of the content that's in the TV show that's debuting in just a few minutes, but there's cool original videos. There's what we call a neighborhood explainer. You can actually go do a deep dive into all these neighborhoods of Chicago. There's a gallery of the art on the L, the history of the L. All of this is at WTTW.com/L.
Okay, and you said you had your own private train for 10 days.
Yeah, it was fun.
Like a full train, multiple cars.
4-car train.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and they just took, maybe it was 6 cars, but they took us where